The studio lights were so bright they almost looked like daylight. The laughter, the cheering, the upbeat Family Feud music. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Sandra Mitchell's life. After all, she'd driven 12 long hours from rural Mississippi with her 3 children and younger sister to be part of the show. A once-in-a-lifetime moment, they said. "Make it count," her oldest son had whispered as the cameras rolled. She smiled at him, not wanting him to see how pale her lips had turned, how her hands trembled as she held the buzzer. Behind that smile was exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones, the kind coffee can't fix. For 2 straight years, Sandra had been living a life that demanded more than any one person could give. By day, she stocked shelves at a grocery store. By afternoon, she watched other people's children, and when the rest of the world went to sleep, she put on her cleaning uniform and scrubbed corporate offices until dawn. Her ex-husband had disappeared like smoke, leaving her with 3 children, $40,000 of debt, and an old car that coughed like it was on its last breath. But she'd made it here, Atlanta, the Family Feud studio, the famous stage she'd only seen on television. It was supposed to be the break her family needed. A win could mean paid bills, food in the fridge, maybe even Christmas gifts for the kids that didn't come from secondhand stores. She told herself, "Just smile, Sandra. Just make it through today." "Let's welcome the Mitchell family." Steve Harvey's voice boomed, warm and commanding, and the crowd erupted in applause. Sandra's little girl, Destiny, squealed with delight from the front row, waving at her mother. Steve winked at the kids and cracked a joke that made the whole studio laugh. The energy was contagious. For a fleeting moment, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. When the buzzer sounded, she was quick on her feet. "Name something that makes you smile," Steve read from his card, grinning as he waited for her response. Sandra's mind flashed to her children. The way they sang together in the car, the sound of their laughter echoing through their tiny rented apartment. She opened her mouth to answer, but suddenly the lights above her blurred. Her vision doubled, then spun. Her throat went dry. She gripped the podium, forcing a shaky smile. My kids," she whispered. The words barely escaped her lips. Steve leaned closer. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, sweetheart." But before Sandra could repeat herself, the world around her started to fade. The colors of the set, the laughter of the audience, Steve's concerned face, all of it melted into a soft gray haze. Then came the roaring sound in her ears like a wave crashing. Her knees gave way. The last thing she remembered was hitting the floor and whispering, over and over, I'm sorry. A gasp rippled through the studio. The cameras stopped rolling. For a few seconds, everything was still. Then chaos erupted. Crew members shouted for the medics. Steve Harvey dropped his cue cards and rushed to her side. The crowd's excitement had turned into collective fear. As paramedics pushed through the stage doors, Steve knelt beside Sandra, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Hey there, you're going to be okay," he said softly, his voice cutting through the noise like a calm in a storm. When Sandra's eyes fluttered open, she saw Steve's face above her, kind, steady, and full of concern. "I ruined your show," she whispered, her lips trembling. "I'm sorry." Steve shook his head. "You didn't ruin anything. You don't ever have to apologize for being human." His tone was quiet but powerful. The studio lights reflected off his eyes as he spoke. Around them, cameras had stopped. Producers whispered about schedules. But Steve didn't move. He stayed kneeling beside her, holding her hand as if she were a member of his own family. "Can you tell me your name?" one of the medics asked, kneeling beside Steve. "Sandra Mitchell," she replied faintly. "I'm fine. I haven't eaten much." Steve's brow furrowed. "When's the last time you had something to eat?" Sandra's face turned red. "Yesterday morning, maybe. I don't remember." For a man who'd made a career out of laughter and quick wit, Steve went silent. In that moment, he saw something beyond exhaustion. He saw a woman fighting for survival while the world kept asking her to smile. He turned to the medics. "Take her to the hospital," he said firmly. Then he looked to his producer. "I'm going with her." "Steve, we still have another family waiting to play," the producer stammered. "We can finish taping later or tomorrow, but..." "This is more important," he said simply, already walking toward the ambulance. The cameras never caught that moment. It wasn't part of the broadcast. But for those who were there, it was unforgettable. The host of one of America's most joyful shows leaving his stage behind to ride with a woman he'd just met. Inside the ambulance, Sandra lay pale and trembling, her children clutching each other. Steve sat beside her, his hand never leaving hers. The sirens wailed through the Atlanta streets. Between gasps, Sandra began to talk about the 3 jobs, the debt, the sleepless nights, the endless fear of losing her home. "Who was I supposed to tell?" she whispered. "Who would care? I just keep going. I have to." Steve looked out the window at the passing city lights and said the 5 words that would stay with her forever. "You don't have to fight alone." Sandra didn't know it yet, but those words were the beginning of everything. The start of a 7-year journey that would change not only her life, but hundreds of others who'd one day learn what true compassion looks like when it steps off the stage and walks beside you into real life. The sirens faded as the ambulance slowed before the glowing red letters of Atlanta General Hospital. Steve Harvey sat beside Sandra, still holding her hand, while her children huddled together on the opposite bench, their faces pale and frightened. The paramedic spoke in clipped, professional tones, but Steve's voice never lost its calm. "You're gonna be okay, Miss Sandra," he repeated softly, almost like a prayer. For once, the man known for his booming laughter and punchline timing sounded like a preacher delivering comfort in a storm. Inside the emergency bay, nurses rushed forward. Machines beeped, clipboards clicked, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Sandra's eyes darted toward her children. "Please," she murmured weakly, "don't let them be scared." Steve gave a small nod, already turning to kneel beside Marcus, her eldest. "Your mama's strong, son," he told him. "You hear me? She's gonna walk out of here just fine." The boy swallowed hard and nodded, but his voice trembled when he asked, "She fell 'cause we came on the show, didn't she?" Steve looked at him, really looked, and for a moment saw his own childhood reflected back. The worry, the guilt, the longing to protect someone when you're too young to fix anything. He shook his head slowly. "No, son. She fell because she's been carrying too much on her own. That's not her fault. It's life. But life's about to change." Hours passed. The producers had called, offering to send a car for Steve to resume taping. But he ignored every call. He sat in the waiting room, jacket folded neatly on his lap, the Family Feud stage miles away now in both distance and importance. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave but kind. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, and severely fatigued. She needs rest and proper meals. Honestly, it's a miracle she's been functioning at all." Steve exhaled and rubbed his forehead. "How long before she's back on her feet?" he asked quietly. "With rest, a few days," the doctor replied. "But if she goes back to the same routine, she'll end up right back here." When Steve stepped into her hospital room later, Sandra looked fragile but awake. Her IV lines shimmered under the fluorescent light. "You should be on set," she whispered, embarrassed. "You've got a whole audience waiting for you." He smiled faintly. "They can wait. You can't." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry you saw me like that." Steve leaned forward in his chair. "You keep apologizing like you did something wrong. You didn't. You just got tired of being stronger than you should have to be." There was silence between them, the kind that carries truth. Then Sandra spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to faint. I just, hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Every dollar goes to the kids. Groceries, bills, gas. I figured I'd eat after the show." Steve's chest tightened. He thought of his own mother, who'd worked 2 jobs and skipped meals so her children wouldn't go hungry. He remembered the nights she'd cry in the kitchen, thinking no one could hear her. "You remind me of my mama," he said softly. "She used to say the same thing. I'll eat later." But later never came until someone stepped in to make her. Sandra blinked back tears. "I don't need pity, Mr. Harvey." He smiled. "Good, 'cause I don't give pity, I give plans." The next morning, Steve arrived with breakfast for the whole family. Warm pancakes, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and juice. The kids devoured their plates while Sandra hesitated, still shy. "Eat," Steve said gently. "That's not charity. That's fuel. You can't fight life on an empty stomach." Over the next 2 days, he visited daily. Between shoots, he called the hospital, checked on the kids, made sure Sandra had everything she needed. He paid her hospital bill quietly without a word to anyone. When the doctor finally cleared her for discharge, Steve was there with his car waiting outside. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling as she gathered her things. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just promise me one thing. Don't go back to the same grind that put you here." "I don't have another choice." Steve opened the car door for her, then paused. "You always have a choice. You just need someone to remind you that you do." Back at the hotel where Steve arranged for her family to stay until she recovered, Sandra watched her children jump on the bed, their laughter echoing through the room. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of tomorrow pressing on her chest. That night, Steve sat across from her at the small table near the window, the Atlanta skyline glowing behind him. "You've got grit," he said, "but grit without rest breaks people. I don't want to see that happen to you again." She looked down, twisting the edge of her blanket. "I can't accept your help forever, Mr. Harvey." He laughed softly. "Good thing I'm not offering forever. Just a new start." He leaned forward. "You told me you work 3 jobs, right? You ever think about learning how to run one business instead of breaking yourself across 3? Sandra looked confused. "Me? I barely finished high school." "So what?" he said. "My mama used to tell me education don't stop when school does. It stops when you stop believing you can do more. I can get you enrolled in a business course, help you learn how to manage, budget, grow. You already know how to work. I'll show you how to make that work for you." Tears slipped down her face. "Why are you doing this?" Steve's gaze softened. "Because someone once did it for me." That night, when Steve finally left, Sandra stood by the window watching the Atlanta lights blink in the distance. For the first time in her adult life, she let herself imagine a future that didn't start and end with exhaustion. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning of something she never believed she deserved. A second chance. What she didn't know was that Steve Harvey had already called his team that night with instructions that would soon turn her life inside out. Not with fame, not with pity, but with purpose. The morning after Steve Harvey made that late-night phone call, Sandra Mitchell woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet hum of her children laughing somewhere down the hotel hallway. For the first time in years, there was no alarm clock blaring at 4 a.m., no rush to iron uniforms, no scramble for bus fare or lunch money. She stood by the window staring at the sunrise cutting across the Atlanta skyline, her reflection caught in the glass. Tired, still fragile, but alive. She whispered to herself, maybe this really is a new start. Downstairs, Steve was already waiting, a to-go cup in one hand, his other hand resting on the hood of his black SUV. "Morning, Miss CEO," he said with a grin when she approached. Sandra laughed, caught off guard. "CEO? I don't even have a steady job right now." He shrugged. "Not yet, but if you're going to learn business, you got to start thinking like one." They drove through downtown Atlanta as he explained his plan, a local community college program that offered small business training for women. "I talked to the director last night," Steve said, glancing over at her. "They've got a class starting Monday. You'll be in it. Tuition's handled. You just show up." Sandra shook her head in disbelief. "Mr. Harvey, I don't have the clothes, the books, nothing." "Handled," he interrupted. "And it's Steve. If you call me Mr. Harvey one more time, I'll start calling you Madam Mitchell, CEO of Future Enterprises." "Deal." She laughed again, and that sound, genuine, unforced laughter, startled even her. It had been years since she'd heard her own joy out loud. The next week, Sandra walked into her first classroom with trembling hands and a secondhand notebook Steve had insisted on buying her himself. Around her sat women from every walk of life, mothers, veterans, retirees, all chasing second chances. The professor, a kind woman named Dr. Elaine Brooks, noticed Sandra's nervousness and smiled. "You belong here," she said simply, and somehow those 3 words began to chip away at the years of self-doubt that had built up inside her. Meanwhile, Steve stayed in touch constantly. Every few days he called to check in. "What did you learn this week?" he'd ask, and when she tried to downplay her progress, he'd push gently. Don't tell me what you didn't do. Tell me what you did do. Slowly, Sandra began to believe that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. At night after her classes, she would tuck her kids into bed in the small apartment Steve had arranged for her family and stay up reading about entrepreneurship. She filled pages of her notebook with sketches of ideas, cleaning services, organizing homes, maybe even hiring other single mothers who needed flexible hours. She didn't realize she was sketching the blueprint for her own future. One Saturday morning, 6 months after her collapse on the Family Feud stage, Steve invited her to his office. His assistant ushered her into a bright conference room where folders and charts covered the table. Steve gestured for her to sit. So, I've been thinking, he began. You've been cleaning offices for years, right? What if instead of cleaning for someone else, you owned the business? Sandra froze. Owned it? I don't have that kind of money or know-how. Steve slid a paper across the table, a proposal outlining startup costs, licenses, and local grants available for women entrepreneurs. You don't need to have it all. You just need to start. She stared at the numbers, her fingers trembling again. Not from fear this time, but from possibility. What would I even call it? She asked quietly. He smiled. Your name's Mitchell. You've earned it. Mitchell's Cleaning Services. Simple, honest, strong. That night, Sandra called her sister in Mississippi, voice trembling with excitement. He wants to help me start a business, she said. Her sister laughed in disbelief. Girl, from Family Feud to business owner? You sure this isn't a dream? It feels like one, Sandra whispered. But for the first time, it feels like a dream that could come true. By September 2018, Mitchell's Cleaning Services officially launched. Steve refused to let her celebrate alone. Every business needs a first client, he told her. Guess who yours is? When she blinked in confusion, he added, Harvey Productions. We're hiring you. The first morning of her contract, Sandra arrived at the production building in a crisp white uniform with the company's name embroidered over her heart. Her kids stood outside the building, waving at her as she walked in. Mama's a businesswoman now, little Destiny shouted proudly. Sandra smiled, the memory of the Family Feud stage flickering through her mind. The blinding lights, the embarrassment, Steve's voice whispering, You're going to be okay. Only now those same words felt prophetic. She wasn't just okay, she was rising. Business grew quickly. Word spread about her meticulous service, her kindness to clients, her fairness to workers. Within a year, she'd hired 5 other single mothers who, like her, needed more than a paycheck. They needed dignity. Sandra gave them both. Steve continued mentoring her from a distance, checking in every few weeks. You keeping those books balanced? He'd tease. Remember, the IRS doesn't take I forgot as an answer. But beneath the humor was pride. He saw in her what he'd always believed, the strength that hides inside struggle. One evening, during a dinner at a small restaurant in Atlanta, Sandra confessed, Sometimes I still feel like that woman who fainted on national television. Like I don't deserve any of this. Steve leaned back and said, Deserve's got nothing to do with it. Life doesn't give us what we deserve. It gives us what we fight for. And you fought harder than most. As months turned into years, Sandra's business became more than a company. It became a mission. Each mother she hired found not just work, but sisterhood. They called themselves the Second Chance Sisters, half jokingly at first, until the name stuck. By the time 2020 arrived, Mitchell's Cleaning Services had expanded into 2 neighboring cities. Sandra's phone rang constantly with new clients. Her children, now teenagers, helped with the scheduling and bookkeeping after school. The woman who once lived on coffee and fear was now feeding families and building futures. And one evening, as she sat in her office signing paychecks, she looked up at the framed photo on her desk. A still from the day Steve Harvey knelt beside her on that Family Feud stage. She traced the glass with her fingertips and whispered, You kept your promise. What she didn't know was that Steve wasn't finished yet. He was about to make a call that would take her story and her mission to an entirely new level. The call came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Sandra was in her office, surrounded by invoices and the faint scent of lemon polish that had become the signature of her company. Her business now ran in 3 cities, employing a dozen women, all single mothers who once sat where she had been, clutching bills and fear in equal measure. Destiny was helping in the next room, her laughter echoing down the hall as she trained a new hire on scheduling software. Marcus was out picking up supplies in the company van that bore their family name, Mitchell's Cleaning Services, where every home gets a second chance. Life had a rhythm now, steady, peaceful, and honest. Then her phone rang, flashing a name that still made her heart skip. "Steve Harvey," she answered with a smile. "You're supposed to be on TV, not calling me," she teased. "I am on TV," Steve replied with a chuckle. "But I got an idea that can't wait till commercial break. You still got that fire in you, Sandra?" She laughed softly. "Depends what you're planning to light on fire, Steve." "I want to build something," he said. "A foundation for single mothers who want to start businesses, just like you did. You've proven the model works. I can fund it. You can run it." Sandra froze. For a moment, the hum of the office, the distant city noise, everything fell silent. "You want me to run it?" "I don't want anyone else to," Steve said simply. "It's your story that'll give those women hope. You fell, you rose, and you built something real. You can show them how." Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, "You sure about this?" Steve's laugh rumbled through the phone. "You asking me if I'm sure? You're the proof I've been waiting for." And just like that, the Second Chance Sisters Foundation was born. Within months, Sandra and Steve were standing side by side again, this time on a stage in front of a small crowd of donors, community leaders, and women clutching their own business ideas. The foundation offered mentorship, small startup loans, and free training programs. Sandra poured her heart into it, meeting every applicant personally. "We don't just give you money," she would tell them. "We give you belief." Under her guidance, the foundation flourished. Dozens of single mothers opened catering services, clothing stores, home care businesses. One by one, Sandra watched them step into their power. Each success felt like healing another version of herself. The woman who once lay, trembling on a stage, whispering apologies for being too tired to stand. By 2024, the foundation had helped over 150 women build businesses. News outlets began to cover her story. "From collapse to CEO," read one headline. She was invited to speak at universities, community centers, even on talk shows, but she never chased fame. She still wore the same modest suits, still drove her dented van, still worked alongside her team every Friday to remind herself where she came from. Then one day an invitation arrived that made her laugh out loud. It was embossed with gold lettering and bore the Family Feud logo. Inside was a handwritten note. "7 years ago, you fell on my stage. I think it's time we rewrite that ending. Come back home." Steve. When she arrived at the Atlanta studio that spring, the air smelled the same. Stage lights, polished floors, the faint whir of cameras, but everything else felt different. Her children walked beside her now, taller, confident, proud. Marcus, now 16, held the door open for his mother. Destiny, 14, adjusted her blazer and whispered, "Mama, you nervous?" Sandra smiled. "No, baby. This time I'm standing tall." When Steve saw her walk onto the set, he grinned from ear to ear. The audience, unaware of her story, clapped politely, until he turned to them with that familiar twinkle in his eye. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, 7 years ago, a contestant named Sandra Mitchell fainted on this very stage. Most of y'all never saw it, but that day changed my life, and hers." The studio went silent. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen behind them played a montage. Clips of Sandra's journey, from the Family Feud collapse to her hospital stay, to her first day as a business owner. Then came images of smiling women and children, the faces of those she'd helped through her foundation. When the video ended, Sandra stood there, her eyes glistening. Steve put a hand on her shoulder. "This woman didn't just get back up," he said. "She built a ladder so others could climb too." The audience rose to their feet, applause swelling through the room. Sandra wiped her tears and looked out at the faces. strangers who were now witnessing the part of her life that had once been hidden behind exhaustion and silence. I used to think falling down was failure, she said into the microphone. But I learned that falling down is sometimes just how you meet the people who'll help you rise higher than you ever imagined. That line would go viral later that night, shared across social media with millions of views. But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about fame. She was thinking about the women watching from home, the ones still scraping together meals, still working double shifts, still praying for a miracle. She wanted them to see her and know that miracles don't always arrive wrapped in luck. Sometimes they come in the form of hard work, kindness, and one person who refuses to let you fall alone. After the show, as the studio emptied, Sandra walked across the stage and stood in the very spot where she had collapsed all those years ago. The floor gleamed under the lights, polished to perfection. She knelt down, touched it, and whispered, "Thank you." Steve joined her, hands in his pockets. "Funny thing about falling," he said quietly. "It makes getting back up mean something." Sandra smiled. "It does." That night, she returned home to her foundation office, where the walls were covered with photos of the women whose lives had changed through Second Chance Sisters. Some had written letters, thank yous, prayers, stories of hope. She sat at her desk, opened her journal, and wrote, "Success isn't about money or applause. It's about legacy. It's about the women who now believe they can stand, the children who sleep without fear, and the truth that one act of compassion can change the world." Outside, the city lights blinked like stars, and somewhere deep inside her, Sandra knew that what had started as a moment of shame on national television had become a movement of strength. The place where she had fallen was no longer a memory of failure. It was sacred ground, a reminder that even the hardest landings can lift you to greater heights when love, faith, and second chances lead the way.